1999. Fairview Hospital. Floor 7. 6 patients died screaming in the ICU between March 15 and March 23, 1999. The official cause of death for all 6 was listed as cardiac arrest. But cardiac arrest patients don't scream. They don't convulse for 17 minutes straight. And they certainly don't tear their forelines out with such force that they leave deep gouges in their own arms. The 7th floor ICU was permanently sealed on March 24, 1999. 25 years later, hospital administration still refuses to discuss what happened during those 8 days. What you're about to hear is based on sealed medical records, witness testimonies, and security footage that was supposedly destroyed. But nothing is ever truly destroyed in a hospital. Someone always keeps a copy. If this story sends chills down your spine, hit that like button and subscribe to Ward 13 for more medical mysteries that the healthcare industry doesn't want you to know about. March 15, 1999, 2:47 a.m. Nurse Patricia Chen had been working the night shift in Fairview Hospital's 7th floor ICU for 12 years. She'd seen patients die in every way imaginable, peacefully, violently, suddenly, slowly. But she'd never heard anything like the sound that came from room 734 at 2:47 a.m. on March 15, 1999. It wasn't human, Patricia would later tell investigators in a sealed deposition. It was the sound an animal makes when it's caught in a trap. The patient in 734 was James Morrison, a 54-year-old construction worker who'd been admitted 3 days earlier after a scaffolding accident crushed his ribs and punctured his lung. His condition had been stable, good, even. His oxygen saturation was at 97%, his heart rate steady at 78 bpm. All his vitals were normal when Patricia checked them at 2:30 a.m. 17 minutes later, the screaming started. Patricia ran toward 734, her soft-soled shoes squeaking against the polished linoleum floor. The ICU's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting that familiar blue-white glow that made everything look slightly dead. Room 734 was the third door on the left, between the medication storage room and the supply closet that always smelled faintly of disinfectant and latex. The screaming stopped abruptly as she reached for the door handle. Inside, James Morrison was sitting upright in bed, his hospital gown soaked in sweat, his eyes wide and fixed on something in the far corner of the room. His heart monitor was beeping erratically, 145 bpm, then 67, then 198. The numbers kept jumping in patterns that made no medical sense. "Mr. Morrison?" Patricia approached the bed cautiously. "James, can you hear me?" He turned to look at her, and Patricia would later swear that for just a moment his eyes were completely black. Not the pupils, the entire eye, from corner to corner, like looking into a hole. "They're in the walls," James whispered, his voice hoarse from screaming. "They've been in the walls since 1987. They're waiting for the right frequency." "James, you're having a nightmare. You're safe. You're in Fairview Hospital. Get them out." James suddenly lunged forward, his hands clawing at his chest where the central line had been inserted. "Get them out of me." The heart monitor flatlined at 2:52 a.m. James Morrison was dead, his fingers still wrapped around the central line he'd torn from his own chest. The autopsy would later show that he'd somehow managed to rupture his superior vena cava, a vein that requires significant force to damage. Dr. Michael Torres arrived 6 minutes later. He was the night shift attending physician, a man who'd worked in emergency medicine for 18 years and had seen his share of unusual deaths. But when he examined James Morrison's body, he found something that would haunt him for the rest of his career. Carved into the flesh of James's forearm, in perfect medical terminology, were the words, "Contraindicated for patient 1987. The cuts were too precise to be self-inflicted, too deep to have been made without James screaming in agony. But Patricia had been standing right next to him when he died, and his hands had never left his chest. "We need to call administration," Dr. Torres told Patricia as he pulled the sheet over James Morrison's face. "And we need to check the other patients. All of them." Room 731. Helen Rodriguez, post-operative appendectomy, stable condition. Room 732. David Kim, motorcycle accident, critical but improving. Room 733. Empty. Room 735. Margaret O'Brien, stroke patient, unresponsive but stable vitals. Room 736. Thomas Fletcher, heart attack survivor, scheduled for discharge. All normal. All quiet. But as Patricia walked back toward the nurses' station, she noticed something odd about room 733. The door was closed, unusual for an empty room during night shift. Standard protocol was to keep empty rooms open for easy monitoring and cleaning. She approached the door and pressed her ear against it. From inside came the faint sound of medical equipment beeping. Heart monitors, ventilators, 4 pumps, all the familiar sounds of an occupied ICU room. Patricia opened the door. The room was empty. Completely empty. No bed, no equipment, no furniture of any kind. Just bare walls, a bare floor, and a single electrical outlet that sparked occasionally. But the beeping continued. It was coming from inside the walls. Dr. Torres found Patricia standing frozen in the doorway of room 733, staring at the empty space. "Patricia? What is it? Can you hear that?" she whispered. Dr. Torres listened carefully. The ICU was never truly quiet. There were always monitors beeping, ventilators humming, the soft shuffle of staff moving through the halls. But in room 733, there was something else. Something that didn't belong. It sounded like a patient coding. The rapid, urgent beeping of a heart monitor detecting ventricular fibrillation. The kind of sound that sent medical staff running, that triggered immediate life-saving protocols. But there was no patient, no equipment, no source for the sound. "We need to evacuate this floor," Dr. Torres said quietly. "Right now. What about the patients? We can't just dash. We'll move them to the 6th floor ICU. Emergency relocation. I'll handle the paperwork." As they began the process of transferring patients, Patricia noticed something else. The medical chart for room 733, the empty room, showed a patient admission from March 15, 1987. Exactly 12 years earlier. The patient's name was listed as unknown male, age approximately 35. Cause of admission: severe lacerations, possible surgical complications. Date of discharge: patient expired March 23, 1987, 11:47 p.m. But according to hospital records, room 733 had been used for storage since 1985. No patients had ever been admitted to that room. The chart was signed by Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne, Chief of Surgery. Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne had died in a car accident in 1988. As the night wore on and the remaining patients were safely transferred to other floors, Patricia found herself unable to stop thinking about James Morrison's final words. "They've been in the walls since 1987. The same year as the mysterious patient chart. The same year that, according to maintenance records she'd accessed from the hospital's database, significant electrical work had been done on the 7th floor ICU. The same year that 3 nurses had requested transfers from the night shift, citing unusual disturbances and equipment malfunctions. At 5:43 a.m., as the sun began to rise over Fairview Hospital, Patricia made a decision that would change her life forever. She was going to find out what really happened in 1987. And she was going to discover that some secrets are buried so deep in a hospital's foundation that they become part of the building itself. March 16, 1999, 11:22 a.m. Patricia Chen hadn't slept. After her shift ended at 7 a.m., she'd driven straight to the Fairview Public Library and spent 4 hours combing through old newspaper archives, looking for any mention of incidents at the hospital in 1987. What she found was a pattern of silence. March 1987. No unusual deaths reported. No medical emergencies that made the news. No malpractice suits filed. No investigations launched. It was too clean. Too perfect. In Patricia's 12 years at Fairview, there had never been a month without some kind of incident that generated paperwork, insurance claims, or at least gossip among the staff. Hospitals were places where things went wrong constantly. It was the nature of the business. But March 1987 was a complete blank in the public record. Patricia returned to Fairview at 2 p.m., 3 hours before her next shift. She had a plan, and it involved someone who'd been at the hospital longer than anyone else still working there. Dorothy Williams had been the head of medical records for 37 years. She knew where every file was kept, including the ones that weren't supposed to exist anymore. If anyone could help Patricia understand what had happened in 1987, it was Dorothy. She found Dorothy in her basement office, surrounded by filing cabinets that reached from floor to ceiling. The smell of old paper and toner cartridges hung in the air like incense. "Patricia, honey, you look terrible. Didn't you just get off shift?" "Dorothy, I need to ask you about something." "About 1987. The older woman's expression changed immediately. She glanced toward the door, then moved closer to Patricia and spoke in a whisper. "What specifically about 1987? March 15th through March 23rd. The 7th floor ICU. There was a patient, unknown male, severe lacerations. Chart signed by Dr. Hawthorne." Dorothy was quiet for a long time. Then she walked to a filing cabinet in the far corner of the room, one that looked older and more worn than the others. She pulled out a thick manila folder marked "Confidential, Administrative Review Only." "I've been waiting 24 years for someone to ask me about this," Dorothy said. "I was hoping I'd retire before anyone did." The file contained medical records, incident reports, and photographs that made Patricia's stomach turn. But more importantly, it contained the truth about what had happened on the 7th floor ICU in March 1987. Patient 1987 to 734. Michael Davidson, 35 years old, admitted March 15th with severe lacerations across his chest and abdomen. The injuries were consistent with surgical incisions, but there was no record of any surgery being performed. Patient 1987 to 731. Sarah Mitchell, 29 years old, admitted March 16th with identical injuries. Patient 1987 to 732. Robert Chen, 41 years old, admitted March 17th with identical injuries. Patient 1987 to 735. Linda Foster, 33 years old, admitted March 18th with identical injuries. Patient 1987 to 736. Kevin Walsh, 37 years old, admitted March 19th with identical injuries. Patient 1987 to 738. Maria Santos, 31 years old, admitted March 20th with identical injuries. All 6 patients had died between March 21st and March 23rd, 1987. All 6 had died screaming. All 6 had somehow carved medical terminology into their own flesh before death. The official cause of death was listed as complications from their injuries, Dorothy explained, her voice shaking slightly. But the real cause? Patricia, these people were healthy when they arrived. The lacerations were fresh, but they were clean. Surgical quality. Someone with medical training had made those cuts. Patricia studied the photographs. The incisions were indeed precise, too precise for random violence, too systematic for accident. They looked exactly like the kind of cuts a surgeon would make during an exploratory laparotomy. Who was doing this to them? That's what Dr. Hawthorne was trying to find out when she died. She'd been investigating for weeks, trying to identify who was making these cuts and how the patients were ending up in our ICU. She suspected someone on the medical staff was involved. Dorothy pulled out another document, Dr. Hawthorne's personal notes, written in her distinctive handwriting. March 22, 1987. The pattern is becoming clear. All 6 patients show identical incision patterns, midline laparotomy extending from xiphoid process to pubic symphysis, with additional lateral incisions at the level of the umbilicus. The cuts are made with surgical precision using what appears to be a number 10 scalpel blade. More disturbing, all patients report the same hallucinations before death. They claim to see surgical equipment moving by itself in their rooms. They speak of hearing voices giving medical commands, scalpel, retract, suction, but no surgical procedures are being performed. Most disturbing, toxicology shows presence of propofol, midazolam, and rocuronium in all patient systems. These are anesthesia drugs. Someone has been sedating these patients and performing unauthorized surgery. I believe the perpetrator is someone with full access to the ICU and the pharmacy. Someone who understands anesthesia protocols and surgical procedures. Someone the patients would trust. I have my suspicions about who it might be. Tomorrow I will confront them directly. Dr. Hawthorne died in a car accident on March 23, 1987. Her car skidded off the road at 11:47 p.m., the exact time that the last patient, Maria Santos, was pronounced dead. The investigation died with Dr. Hawthorne, Dorothy continued. Administration sealed all the records and transferred everyone who'd been working on the 7th floor during those days. New staff, new procedures, new security protocols. It was like they erased those 8 days from the hospital's history. Patricia felt a chill run down her spine. Dorothy, what happened to room 733? In all these records, there's no mention of room 733. That's because there was no room 733 in 1987. The rooms went 732, then 734. Room 733 was added during the renovation in 1988. Added? You can't just add a room to an existing building without major construction. Dorothy nodded grimly. They didn't add it to the existing building, Patricia. They built it into the wall cavity between 732 and 734. It's barely large enough for a hospital bed and some basic equipment. The implications hit Patricia like a physical blow. Room 733 hadn't been built for patients. It had been built for something else entirely. Dorothy, I need to see the construction records for that renovation. I was afraid you'd say that. Dorothy pulled out one final document. The construction was ordered by the new chief of surgery, Dr. Richard Vance. He started working at Fairview on March 24, 1987, one day after Dr. Hawthorne died. The construction order was specific: installation of observation chamber between ICU rooms 732 and 734. Chamber to include one-way viewing panels, audio monitoring equipment, and independent electrical systems. Access via maintenance corridor only. Room 733 wasn't a patient room. It was a viewing chamber. Someone had been watching the ICU patients, watching them die. And now, 12 years later, the same pattern was starting again. Patricia looked at the clock on Dorothy's desk. 4:47 p.m. Her shift started in 13 minutes. Dorothy, is Dr. Vance still at Fairview? He retired in 1998. But Patricia... Dorothy's voice dropped to barely a whisper. He still has privileges here. He still has access to the building. And according to the keycard logs I pulled this morning, someone used his access code to enter the 7th floor at 2:30 a.m. yesterday. 15 minutes before James Morrison started screaming. As Patricia walked toward the elevator that would take her back to the 7th floor ICU, she realized that the nightmare wasn't over. It was just beginning again. March 17, 1999, 10:15 p.m. Patricia had requested the patient files for everyone who'd been admitted to Fairview Hospital in the past week. What she discovered made her blood run cold. Helen Rodriguez, David Kim, Margaret O'Brien, Thomas Fletcher, the 4 patients who had been transferred from the 7th floor ICU after James Morrison's death, all had something in common. They had all been treated by Dr. Richard Vance during previous hospital stays. Helen Rodriguez, appendectomy in 1996. Surgeon, Dr. Richard Vance. David Kim, emergency surgery after motorcycle accident in 1997. Surgeon, Dr. Richard Vance. Margaret O'Brien, brain surgery following stroke in 1998. Surgeon, Dr. Richard Vance. Thomas Fletcher, cardiac bypass surgery in 1995. Surgeon, Dr. Richard Vance. Patricia sat in the break room at 10:15 p.m., surrounded by medical files and printouts from the hospital's database. The pattern was becoming undeniable. Dr. Vance hadn't been randomly selecting victims in 1987. He'd been following up on his own patients. Patients who'd survived surgeries that, perhaps, he'd intended them not to survive. But why wait 12 years? What had triggered him to start again? The answer came from an unexpected source. Patricia's phone buzzed with a text message from Dorothy Williams. Check local obituaries for Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne's family. Found something important. Patricia pulled up the Fairview Tribune's online obituary section. It didn't take long to find what Dorothy was referring to. Hawthorne, Jennifer Elizabeth, died peacefully at home on March 14, 1999, after a long battle with cancer. Jennifer was the beloved daughter of the late Dr. Elizabeth Hawthorne, former chief of surgery at Fairview Hospital. Jennifer had been working to organize her mother's papers and research notes, with plans to donate them to the medical school library. She is survived by her husband and 2 children. Memorial service to be held March 20th at St. Matthew's Church. Jennifer Hawthorne had died one day before James Morrison. One day before the killings started again. And she'd been organizing her mother's research notes. Patricia felt the pieces clicking into place. Dr. Hawthorne had been investigating the 1987 murders when she died. If Jennifer had been going through her mother's papers, she might have discovered evidence that could implicate Dr. Vance. Evidence that Dr. Vance needed to destroy. But Jennifer was already dead from cancer. So why kill the ICU patients? The answer came to Patricia in a flash of horrible understanding. The patients weren't the real targets. They were bait. Dr. Vance was trying to recreate the exact conditions from 1987. The same pattern of deaths, the same mysterious circumstances, the same administrative panic that had led to the original investigation being shut down. He was counting on the hospital administration doing exactly what they'd done before, sealing the records, transferring the staff, erasing the evidence. And this time, there would be no Dr. Hawthorne to investigate. The only person who knew the truth about 1987 was Dorothy Williams. And the only person who was actively investigating the new deaths was Patricia Chen. Patricia grabbed her phone and dialed Dorothy's extension. It went straight to voicemail. She tried Dorothy's home number. No answer. At 10:23 p.m., Patricia received a text message from an unknown number. Room 733. Come alone. Dorothy is waiting. Patricia stared at the message, her hands shaking. Room 733, the observation chamber. The room that had been built to watch patients die. She should call security. She should call the police. She should do anything except go to room 733 alone. Instead, she found herself walking toward the elevator. The 7th floor was eerily quiet. After the patient transfers, only essential staff remained, 1 nurse per wing, minimal security. The fluorescent lights seemed dimmer than usual, casting long shadows down the empty corridors. Patricia approached room 733 slowly. The door was slightly ajar, and she could see a faint light coming from inside. She pushed the door open. Dorothy Williams was sitting in a chair in the center of the small room, her hands zip-tied behind her back, a piece of medical tape covering her mouth. Her eyes were wide with terror, but she was alive. Standing behind Dorothy was Dr. Richard Vance. He looked exactly as Patricia remembered him. Tall, distinguished, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He wore surgical scrubs and gloves, as if he'd just stepped out of an operating room. "Nurse Chen, thank you for coming. Please close the door behind you." Patricia remained in the doorway. "Let Dorothy go. She doesn't have anything to do with this." "Oh, but she does. Dorothy has been the keeper of inconvenient truths for far too long. She should have destroyed those files years ago, like she was instructed to." Dr. Vance moved around Dorothy's chair, his movements precise and calculated. "You've discovered quite a lot in the past 2 days, Patricia. I'm impressed. Dr. Hawthorne would have been proud. You killed her." "I neutralized a threat to my work. Just as I neutralized her daughter when she started asking uncomfortable questions about her mother's research." "Jennifer died of cancer." Dr. Vance smiled coldly. "Did she?" "The death certificate says cancer, yes. But death certificates can be influenced when the right person reviews them. A little extra morphine in her pain medication, a slight adjustment to her dosage calculations. She died thinking it was the cancer. Peaceful, really." Patricia felt sick. "And the ICU patients?" "James Morrison and the others in 1987. Test subjects. You have to understand, Patricia, medical progress requires sacrifice. My research into consciousness transfer, into the moment of death, into the electrical patterns of the dying brain, it could revolutionize medicine. But it requires controlled observations." He gestured around the small room. The walls were covered with monitoring equipment, screens showing vital signs, EEG patterns, audio recording devices. This room was built to study the dying process, to record every heartbeat, every brainwave, every electrical impulse as consciousness leaves the body. The patients in 1987 provided invaluable data. They were people, not lab rats. They were already dying, Patricia. I simply accelerated the process and gathered data that could save thousands of lives in the future. Dr. Vance pulled out a syringe filled with clear liquid. "Now, I need you to understand something. This room's construction created an interesting side effect. The electrical systems are completely independent from the rest of the hospital. What happens in here doesn't register on any hospital monitors." He moved toward Patricia, the syringe held ready. "The patients I selected this time were chosen specifically because of their previous interactions with you. James Morrison remembered you from his first stay. He trusted you. When he started screaming about them being in the walls, he was referring to my monitoring equipment." Patricia backed toward the door, but it had closed behind her. She tried the handle, locked. "The other patients will experience similar episodes over the next few days. And you'll be here to observe and record their deaths. Your nursing notes will provide the medical legitimacy I need for my research." "I'll never help you." "Oh, but you will. You see, the drug in this syringe is a modified version of succinylcholine. It will paralyze you completely while leaving you fully conscious. You'll be aware of everything that happens, but unable to move or speak." Dr. Vance stepped closer. "You'll be the perfect observer. And when my research is complete, when I've gathered all the data I need about the transition between life and death, you'll become the final test subject." Patricia's mind raced. She was trapped in a room with a serial killer, with no way to call for help and no one who knew where she was. But she remembered something from her nursing training, something about the layout of hospital electrical systems. The independent power supply for room 733 would require a dedicated circuit breaker. And according to the construction documents Dorothy had shown her, that breaker box was located in the maintenance corridor just outside the room. If she could get to that breaker box. "Dr. Vance," Patricia said, trying to keep her voice steady. Before you do this, I need to know something. How did you choose your victims? What made them suitable subjects? He paused, clearly enjoying the opportunity to explain his methodology. Blood type O negative. Universal donors. Their organs could be harvested and used immediately after death, which provided additional research opportunities. As he spoke, Patricia slowly reached into her pocket for her keycard. Hospital keycards could override electronic locks in emergency situations. But more importantly, Dr. Vance continued, they all had previous surgical experiences with me. I'd already mapped their pain responses, their reactions to anesthesia, their psychological profiles during medical stress. Patricia swiped her keycard behind her back, praying the magnetic reader would activate. The door lock clicked softly. The beauty of the system, Dr. Vance said, raising the syringe, is that dash. Patricia threw herself backward through the door and into the corridor. She could hear Dr. Vance shouting behind her as she ran toward the maintenance area. The circuit breaker box was exactly where the construction documents had indicated. Patricia yanked it open and began flipping switches. The lights in room 733 went out. The monitoring equipment went silent. The electronic lock on the door disengaged. Dorothy Williams stumbled out of the darkened room, gasping as she tore the tape from her mouth. Patricia! He's got a scalpel! He's dash! Dr. Vance emerged from room 733, his face twisted with rage. In his hand was a surgical blade that gleamed under the corridor's emergency lighting. But Patricia was ready for him. She'd grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall mount, and she used it like a weapon, spraying chemical suppressant directly into Dr. Vance's face. He dropped the scalpel and fell to his knees, clawing at his eyes. Security! Patricia screamed into her radio. 7th floor ICU. Emergency! As security guards and police officers flooded the corridor, Patricia knelt beside Dorothy and helped her with the zip ties that bound her wrists. Is it over? Dorothy whispered. Patricia looked at Dr. Vance, now handcuffed and being read his rights by a police officer. Then she looked at room 733, its door standing open, its monitoring equipment dark and silent. It's over, she said. But deep down, she knew it wasn't that simple. Room 733 still existed. The monitoring equipment could be repaired. And somewhere in the hospital's vast network of corridors and rooms, other secrets were waiting to be discovered. The 7th floor ICU had been Dr. Vance's laboratory for 12 years. But what else had he been doing during that time? How many other patients had died screaming, their deaths attributed to natural causes? And most disturbing of all, had he been working alone? March 24, 1999, 6 a.m. The FBI raid on Dr. Richard Vance's home revealed the true scope of his crimes. In his basement, investigators found detailed records of 127 deaths spanning 15 years. Not just at Fairview Hospital, but at 3 other medical facilities where he'd held positions. Each death had been carefully documented with photographs, audio recordings, and biological samples. Each victim had been a former patient of his, chosen for specific physiological characteristics that made them suitable for his research into consciousness transfer at the moment of death. Patricia sat in the hospital administrator's office, reading through the FBI's preliminary report. The scope of the investigation was staggering. The families will be notified over the next few weeks, Administrator Janet Morrison explained. We're working with the authorities to review every death that occurred during Dr. Vance's tenure here. There will likely be criminal charges, civil lawsuits, and a complete overhaul of our security and oversight procedures. Patricia nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. Something about the FBI report didn't sit right with her. Mrs. Morrison, according to this report, Dr. Vance claimed he was working alone. But some of these procedures, they would have required assistance. Surgical procedures, anesthesia administration, body disposal. One person couldn't have managed all of this. The FBI is continuing their investigation. If there were accomplices, they'll find them. But Patricia wasn't convinced. She'd spent the past week going through hospital records, looking for patterns that might indicate other staff members were involved. What she'd found was disturbing. Dr. Sarah Martinez, anesthesiologist, had worked closely with Dr. Vance on 89 of the documented cases. She'd retired suddenly in 1998, citing health concerns, and moved to Mexico. Nurse Kevin Walsh, who'd worked the night shift in various ICU units, had been present during 34 of the documented deaths. He'd transferred to a hospital in Oregon in 1997. Pharmacist David Chen, who'd overseen medication distribution, had processed unusual drug requests for Dr. Vance's surgeries 56 times. He'd died in a car accident in 1998. The pattern was clear. Anyone who might have witnessed Dr. Vance's activities had either died, retired, or relocated. Either they were accomplices who'd been systematically eliminated, or they were potential witnesses who'd been silenced. Patricia brought her findings to Detective Maria Santos, the lead investigator on the case. "We've been tracking these connections too," Detective Santos confirmed. Dr. Martinez agreed to an interview via video conference from Guadalajara yesterday. She admits she knew something was wrong with Dr. Vance's procedures, but she thought he was just being overly aggressive with end-of-life care. "What about the others?" Kevin Walsh died in Portland last year. Apparent suicide. And David Chen's car accident in 1998. "We're having it re-investigated as a potential homicide." Detective Santos pulled out a thick file folder. "Patricia, what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room. We've found evidence that Dr. Vance's research was being funded by an outside organization. A biotech company called Meridian Life Sciences. I've never heard of them. Most people haven't. They specialize in consciousness research, near-death experiences, and what they call biological immortality. They paid Dr. Vance $2.3 million over 12 years for his data on brain activity during the dying process. The implications were staggering. Dr. Vance hadn't been a lone psychopath conducting amateur experiments. He'd been part of an organized research program, funded by people who saw human lives as acceptable casualties in their pursuit of understanding death. Detective, if this company was funding his research, they must have known what he was doing. They're accessories to murder. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division is handling that aspect of the case. But here's the thing that should concern you most. Meridian Life Sciences has contracts with 17 other hospitals across the country. And according to our preliminary investigation, at least 6 other doctors have received similar funding for consciousness research. Patricia felt a chill run down her spine. "You're saying there are other Dr. Vances out there?" "We're saying this might be a lot bigger than one rogue surgeon at one hospital." Over the following weeks, as the investigation expanded, the true horror of what had been happening became clear. Meridian Life Sciences had been systematically placing researchers in hospitals across the United States. Their goal was to collect data on the exact moment of human death, brain wave patterns, electrical activity, cellular changes, and what they termed consciousness migration patterns. The company's ultimate objective, according to internal documents seized by federal agents, was to develop technology that could preserve human consciousness after biological death. Digital immortality. And they were willing to murder hundreds of people to achieve it. Dr. Richard Vance was sentenced to life in prison without parole on 127 counts of first-degree murder. But he never revealed the full extent of the conspiracy. Even facing multiple life sentences, he maintained his loyalty to Meridian Life Sciences. The company itself was dissolved in a maze of legal maneuvers and shell corporations. Most of its assets were transferred to offshore accounts, and its leadership disappeared into countries without extradition treaties. The other hospitals in the network were investigated, but proving criminal conspiracy was difficult when the evidence had been systematically destroyed and the key witnesses had died or vanished. Patricia returned to work at Fairview Hospital, but the 7th-floor ICU remained closed. Hospital administration claimed it was being renovated, but Patricia knew the truth. Room 733 was being permanently sealed, its monitoring equipment destroyed, its secrets buried in concrete and steel. But late at night, when Patricia worked the ICU shifts on other floors, she sometimes thought she could still hear the sound of equipment beeping behind the walls. The ghost echoes of Dr. Vance's monitoring systems, still recording data that no one would ever analyze. The families of Dr. Vance's victims received settlements from the hospital's insurance company, but no amount of money could restore the lives that had been lost to corporate greed and medical ambition. And somewhere in the vast network of American hospitals, Patricia knew that other researchers were still conducting their experiments, still collecting their data, still pursuing digital immortality at the cost of human lives. The 7th-floor ICU at Fairview Hospital was closed permanently on December 15, 1999. The official reason given was structural concerns requiring extensive renovation. The unofficial reason was that 3 more patients had died screaming in the months following Dr. Vance's arrest. Their deaths couldn't be linked to him. He was in maximum security prison, with no access to the outside world. But the symptoms were identical: sudden cardiac episodes, unexplained terror, and words carved into their own flesh with impossible precision. Patricia Chen submitted her resignation on December 16, 1999. She never worked in a hospital again. But she never stopped investigating. March 15, 2024, 25 years later. Patricia Chen sits in her home office, surrounded by boxes of documents, photographs, and recordings that chronicle 25 years of research into medical conspiracy and corporate murder. She runs a website now, Medical Mysteries, where she documents cases of suspicious hospital deaths across the country. What started as an attempt to find closure for her own trauma has become a lifelong mission to expose the truth about companies like Meridian Life Sciences. The research continues, she knows. Different companies, different methods, but the same goal: understanding death well enough to defeat it, regardless of the human cost. Last week, she received an email from a nurse in Seattle. 3 patients had died screaming at Swedish Medical Center. All had carved medical terminology into their flesh before death. All had been former patients of Dr. Amanda Foster, who had received a research grant from something called Nexus Biomedical Solutions. The pattern never changes. Only the names. Patricia opens her laptop and begins typing her response to the Seattle nurse. After 25 years, she's learned that the best way to fight monsters is to make sure their victims aren't forgotten. Because somewhere in America, in a hospital that looks just like any other hospital, a doctor is walking into an ICU room at 2:47 a.m. And a patient is about to start screaming. The cycle continues. But now, at least, someone is watching. Someone is documenting. Someone is making sure the truth survives, even when the victims don't. The 7th floor of Fairview Hospital remains empty to this day. Hospital tours skip that floor entirely. But if you stand in the stairwell between the 6th and 8th floors at exactly 2:47 a.m., you can still hear the sound of medical equipment beeping behind the walls. They say it's just the building settling. Patricia Chen knows better. If this story has affected you, please share it. The families of Dr. Vance's victims deserve to have their stories told. And somewhere out there, another nurse might be walking into a situation just like Patricia's. Hit that like button, subscribe to Ward 13, and let us know in the comments. Have you ever experienced something in a hospital that couldn't be explained? Your story might be the key to stopping the next Dr. Vance. Remember, hospitals keep secrets, but they can't keep them forever.